What up, infidels? Welcome to the Friday episode of the Dangerous Brown podcast. You don't see my mom today. We ended up not filming yesterday, so my mom will probably come on sometime next week, either Monday or Friday next week. We'll see when we record the episode. So that means today it's time for another presidential dick energy, guys. You've been waiting for it. This seems to be some of y'all's favorite segment. I'm glad that you like it. Today, we're on to Richard Nixon. Before we get started, though, I want to just point out my shirt. This is a shirt of my friend Chelsea Skidmore. It's one of my favorite shirts. It's her mugshot. I've been kind of waiting for the perfect episode to wear it, and this seemed appropriate. All right, let's get into it. I've written a lot about Richard Nixon. Turns out, interesting guy. Who would have seen that coming? I guess I'll start here, and then we'll work our way backwards, and then we'll come back to Watergate. But this is what's interesting. This is what's interesting about the Watergate scandal, and nobody told me this. I just figured this out just by Googling. But this is the electoral map that Nixon had when the Watergate scandal broke. I mean, the dude lost a 503-point electoral lead. He let that go. What in the Atlanta Falcons happened here? Why would you feel the need to cheat here? Like, if you win by 503 votes and you cheated, that meant you were probably just going to win by like 400 something votes already. You were already going to win in a landslide. The need to cheat here is pretty insane. I would assume, and this is the 1972 election, so the front runner had already, for the Democrats at that point, had already been taken out by his own scandal. Ted Kennedy was done at that point, so you were pretty much walking into this presidency, and the cheat on top of that is pretty insane. To keep it with the football analogies, that would be like if you had the best quarterback and the best coach of all time, and you still decided to deflate some footballs in a game that you won 45-7. To me, Watergate and Deflategate are like the same thing. It's like, hey, you guys were gonna kick ass anyway. Why would you cheat here? It seems ridiculous. And then get caught cheating. I'm not saying don't cheat. I'm just saying don't get caught cheating. Wild, dude. The dude let a 503-point electoral lead slip through his fingers in about 2 years. That was the difference between that election and his resignation. 2 years. So that to lose the faith of that many people is pretty insane. I think it was also one of the biggest margins in popular vote in presidential history campaigns. What? In presidential history? I think. Jesus. Sorry. I had a brain fart there. But yeah, that's an interesting tidbit about this election about Richard Nixon that I had no idea. You would think just if by knowing nothing about it, it's like, oh, if the dude felt the need to cheat, it must have been a close race. Dude, it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. He was leading. He had a lead that Usain Bolt would be jealous of. And he still managed to just completely drop the ball. He had a high approval rating as a president too. Like, it was interesting, but you know, you can't teach old dog new tricks or whatever. I mean, at that point, he was so used to underhanded election tactics that so used to underhanded that I don't think he could stop at that point. I mean, he had earned the nickname Tricky Dick well before this point. I gotta clean off my glasses real quick. So, gotta put this down. Hopefully, you can still hear me a little bit. Yeah, but this looks weird on the video. All right. But we'll come back to Watergate. I think it's easy to automatically assume that I would make Nixon a little dick energy just because he quit, but he's a lot more of a complicated guy than that. What I like about him is the bro doesn't give up, dude. Nixon does not, like, did not, he, the amount of losses he had in politics was insane. The amount of big public losses he had would be enough to make anyone quit, and he persevered. And that there is a sort of lessons in perseverance that if you keep your head down, work hard, bend the rules a little bit, you can get a lot done. And be very successful. I mean, just to get a gauge on how much the dude lost in politics, the dude lost his high school bid for president. That's where his losing starts, in high school. And he just keeps going, man. He's a great orator. He's a championship debater. He could talk. He was very good at convincing people. Let's see. He went to like law school. He got rejected by the FBI. Another government loss. Like, the dude racks him up, bro. Racks him up. But let's see. Right before we even get to this, because mostly this is about people's presidency, but he just has an interesting backstory. He was a congressman for California. He got there by saying the incumbent Democrat was endorsed by a communist-linked group, and he does this a lot. He's I'm pretty sure he was part of the House of Un-American Activities with Senator McCarthy. For those of you who don't know, McCarthy led this sort of committee in the House that was basically a witch hunt looking for communist and socialist people. A lot of people in Hollywood got blacklisted. The play The Crucible is about McCarthy and the House of American Activities, and Nixon was a big part of that. In fact, a lot of his attacks in the stuff that he runs for is comparing his opponent to socialists and communists, and there is a lot of at the Comedy Store. There's this great joke writer, Argus Hamilton, great comedian. He's been there since the 70s, performed every day, or performed constantly there, and he had this joke about how people think, like, this young generation thinks Trump is different, but Trump is just Nixon. And there's a lot of similarities in how they talk. They're charismatic. They have jowls. They're very jowly people. Accuse the other side of being communist or being socialist. Nixon, later, he says he wins his presidency off a silent majority. They appeal to the South. Nixon, at a certain point in his presidency, almost has the Southern Democrats flip to Republicans to help give him majorities in the House and the Senate, but then Watergate happened, so the Southern Democrats decided to avoid being aligned with Nixon, but that was close. I mean, Nixon created something called the Southern Strategy, which is sort of what, we see now, where the Republicans can control the South, where it used to be the other way around, where the Democrats had just a stranglehold on the South since pretty much Civil War time, pre-Civil War time. So that there is a lot of sort of these similarities with Trump, impeached, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so but back to, his congressman days, he was, like I said, very anti-communist, tried to create a registry for communist members, sort of similar to, remember at the beginning of Trump's term, he wanted to create a Muslim registry where all Muslims had to go sign up. It wasn't going to happen, of course, because I've said this many times before. Trump, Saudi Arabia is balls deep in Trump, and they would never let anything like that happen. So yeah, he runs for Senate. So he's in the House. And then he runs for Senate in 1950. Again, wins by aligning his opponents with communists, and then that's where he earns the nickname Tricky Dick. In the sense that his campaign tactics, his ability to get dirt, and his willingness to do anything to get dirt on his opponent, kind of goes beyond what even most politicians are used to. He brings this era of, like, questionable legality already in 1950. And as you'll see in 22 years, it'll catch up to him in a pretty hard way. He's vehemently anti-communist, like I said. I'm just going through my notes here. This everything I'm reading is off Wikipedia. There's nothing more, everything that here can be done by a simple Google search, and I could be wrong about everything. So try not to take anything as like fact. If anything, if you're questioning about any of this, look this up because I could easily be wrong. This is all quick Wikipedia searches at night before I go to bed. I'm like, I wonder what Richard Nixon's dick energy is. You know what I mean? It's not that serious. This is just interesting facts I found off Wikipedia. But he, pro the communist, but I wouldn't say he's like he differs from Trump in the sense that Trump has this very anti-minority feel to him, and Nixon is pretty pro-civil rights. So, like I said, there's similar vibes to them, but they're not same. Nixon is a very complicated person. Just reading this, it's not like, he's just a bad guy. He's chosen as Eisenhower's VP speech, where he's chosen as Eisenhower's vice president, which at the time is, vice president sort of known as like a death sentence in politics. Like that's as far as you'll ever advance, which is not true because even before that, a lot of vice presidents became presidents. But sometimes that's how it's viewed. He defends himself in a speech against corruption because he's already being accused of corruption. That the speech wins the people over, and he's credited with being the first modern vice president. He does a lot of duties. He's very involved in the cabinet. He's very involved in foreign affairs. You'll find his foreign affairs is pretty strong, even throughout his presidency. And this is what I like about Nixon, too. Eisenhower suffers a heart attack. He's out for 6 weeks. Nixon steps in. Now, if you go through American politics, there are many constitutional crises. What we have here with this attempted coup or whatever is not even close to the first one. This is a big one. The president has a heart attack. He's out for 6 weeks. Vice president steps in. What does the vice president do? He could make a power play grab here. There's a vacant. The head of state is vacant. Nixon steps in and makes 0 attempts to seek power. He just fills in for Eisenhower, waits for Eisenhower to come back. Eisenhower comes back. Things keep going in the right way. In fact, Nixon, even then after the heart attack, convinces Eisenhower to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So up until now, I mean, regardless of how he's how good he is at getting dirt and possibly being a little shady, he's already been accused of corruption as vice president. Nixon is a very good game player. He's already vice president. He's vehemently anti-communist. He's pro-minority, so he's really he's pro-civil rights, I should say. So he's really hitting 2 of the major things that are happening at this time, this anti-communist, pro-civil rights sort of thing. And he's on, it seems like, at the time, he's on the right side of each one. It's good gameplay. That's what I like about Nixon. Up until Watergate, it's really, really, really good gameplay on Nixon's part. He is very Cersei-like. You move, you make deals, you do some shady things, but do they come back to haunt you? You'll see. Can you outmaneuver them when they do come back to haunt you? And he's doing that pretty well. 1960, the 1960 election with President Kennedy. That's where he runs against Kennedy for president. He loses. He comes off bad in the first ever television presidential debates. Kennedy is more handsome. He's more charismatic. I believe I read a story once where Kennedy put on makeup. Nixon didn't, because this is the first time they've been on television. They didn't quite know how to make people look. The people who listened to it on the radio thought that Nixon won, and the people who watched it thought that Kennedy won. Kennedy narrowly wins the election. There are charges of voter fraud because the win is so narrow, but Nixon refuses to contest the election. I mean, the 1960 election is close. It's way closer than the 2020 election was in terms of votes and in terms of electoral votes. I'm pretty sure. I'd have to look that up. You know what? I'm going to look this up right now, live on the podcast. But I'm pretty sure it's closer to give me a second, guys. I'm sorry here. 1960 election. Boom. Yeah, 303 to 219. So it's pretty similar, actually. But that's the one where Strom Thurmond got some electoral votes here. But Nixon, it's 26 states to 22 states. Nixon loses the Nixon lost the popular vote by only 0.2%. Actually, less than that. He lost the popular vote by 0.17%. 49.72 to 49.55. That's how close the election was. And there were allegations of voter fraud. And Nixon chose not to investigate it because he didn't want America to look bad. That's also what I like about Nixon. And you'll see this in Watergate, too. I allude to Watergate a lot. Nixon, when things are at the worst for him, he chooses the country over himself. What will make the country look good? What does the country want over what he wants? Nixon clearly wants to be president here. He's a power-hungry dude. And he chooses what's good for the country over him. So he runs after that he runs for governor of California. He loses, and it's not like it's over now. It's over now. He's lost the presidential race. He's lost the governor of California. He lost his high school presidency. That's too many losses. Usually that's the death of someone's career. And the bro comes back in 1968, beats out Ronald Reagan in the primaries. RFK gets shot. Robert Kennedy gets shot. So his leading Democratic challenger is dead. Nixon wins this 1968 election and becomes president. So as a guy who's dead in the water, he comes back again and wins the presidency. So now we're actually kind of in his presidency, and we can sort of look at his presidency. We're still in Vietnam. You know, we're trying to. He's seen as a stable figure, so he'll help us figure out Vietnam. We start to pull out of Vietnam under Nixon. We do some several bombing campaigns on North Vietnam and Cambodia during his time. So there is a bit of like, we're pulling out, but are we really? What's going on? The U.S. is still involved. Vietnam is just sort of this big black spot to any sort of president who had to deal with it. No president seems to come out of the Vietnam issue looking like a good guy. They all deal with it bad. I mean, we'll go over Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson. That's the previous president. Previous president. Soon. So, but the Vietnam is just a bad look on pretty much every single president. Let's see. He left the economy in a poor state. That stagflation we talked about last time, where the economy is stagnant, but there's still massive inflation. So, you know, I mean, he's not going to get big dick energy. It's just not going to happen. He resigned. But the case I'm making is that he shouldn't automatically get little dick energy. There is some like the never quitting, the good gameplay. There is some things about Nixon that are very, very interesting, and are big dick energy don't mean you're a good guy. It means you have confident energy. Let's see. Nixon actually. Here's some. He actually wanted to create an income floor of $1,000. I think $1,600 per year for a family of four, so like a guaranteed minimum income, which is pretty much something that Andrew Yang is fighting for now. He wasn't an environmentalist, but he did nothing to oppose their goals. He set up the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act of 1973. So he actually did a lot for the environment. I mean, way more than almost any modern president can say. I think that's a. You know, it's crazy that the environment's been an issue since the 60s, and we really haven't done much to fix it. And now we're in apparently now insects are dying off. In the South, a bunch of birds are dead. Like, we risk mass extinction coming around. So we'll see what that's going to be like. But, he expanded the Voting Rights Act. He desegregated more schools than any previous president. So, like I said, he's a very complicated guy. He's not just the crook who lost. He is the crook who lost, but he's a little bit more than that. There are of course the negatives. Obviously, he cracked down on anti-war protests violently. He set up the DEA, the Kent State shooting, where the people were protesting the war. I believe 4 students died, and Nixon was pretty much indifferent to their deaths because he thought anti-war protesters were just pawns of communists. You know, the whole communist scapegoat thing in American politics is pretty tiring. I'm not a big fan of it because it's like, you know, I mean, I guess it's just the point of politics that there's gotta be a scapegoat, but you know, it's stuff like oh, anti-war protests, they're just communists. It's like it's very dismissive of what they actually are, right? Well, some of them might be communists or fancy themselves communists, but stuff like that, they actually do have valid points, and it's easy to paint a whole brush a whole group of people as one thing. So anti-war protesters is communists. You know, we do this now with as anti-capital pro-riots. We do this thing where everyone at the riot, the left will say everyone at the riot is a traitor and seditious, and it's like that's not necessarily true. Some of them are good people who genuinely think they're doing good for the country. Now, and a lot of them didn't go into the Capitol. A lot of them were there to just peacefully protest. Like I said, it definitely was a coup attempt, but to paint an entire people with a broad brush is pretty damaging. And it's like, you know, a lot of people on the left want punishment, but they're not asking why this happened. And I think I said this before, where the left has to take a little bit of a responsibility for what happened. It's like the reason why people turn to QAnon, the reason why people turn to these sort of things is because they feel like they're not being listened to and they're told that they're bad people. You know, and social media is just an echo chamber. And if you know, for each side, if you're on the right, it's an echo chamber for you. If you're on the left, it's an echo chamber for you. And if you're doing nothing to reach across and pull them out of your echo chamber, if you're not doing anything to reach across and pull yourself out of your own echo chamber and see what's going on, then, you know, you're not helping the situation. So I'm not a big fan. You know, one of the many reasons I'm not a big fan of Nixon. I'm gonna go on, but I'll just say this right now. I was gonna save it to the end. I mean, I'm gonna give good old Richard a medium dick energy here, just because of you know, he quit, so he can't get the big dick energy. Go down with the ship. You know, if you're gonna get impeached, get impeached. But you know, the ship is sinking. That's where the captain has to go down with it. But at the same time, he is such this big, powerful figure. Everyone knows Richard Nixon. You know, Richard Nixon is a well-known American politician. He's up there. He's got to be one of the most famous presidents. I would imagine more Americans know the name Richard Nixon than Richard Lyndon B. Johnson or Gerald Ford. I would say that once Jimmy Carter dies, it might be going that way as well. You know, so it's so I'm gonna give him medium dick energy, but yeah. Let's continue with his presidency. Foreign policy is what he was strongest at. In fact, after his resignation, he did a good job. And again, this is why he's a fascinating person. He did a good job of reshaping his public image as, like, yes, he was maybe a crook, but he was also the stable figure who was strong at foreign policy. He put out this thing called the Nixon Doctrine, which, you know, undertake the defense of free nations, quote unquote, and provide military aid to a lot of the places in the Middle East, you know, so we're always messing around with the Middle East, but yeah, he had a strong idea of what he wanted, this whole idea of let's protect their freedoms, which is something that goes on today. We bring democracy to Iraq. That's something that idea starts with Nixon, and whether or not that's a good or bad thing, it's a strong thing that still exists in the American psyche that's only being unraveled now, and it's what, 50 years since Nixon was president? Like I said, big dick energy don't mean necessarily good, but to create a cultural mindset that lasts at least 50 years, that's some big dick shit. He began drawing troops out of Vietnam. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So at this point, China, at this point, America hasn't recognized the Mao Zedong communist-led China. They don't view that as a real country yet. They only view Taiwan, the people who live in Taiwan, as the real China, and they only recognize that. So Nixon saw that these Chinese markets that they don't recognize could be good for the American economy, and he also thought China and Russia are the Soviet Union are two big communist powers. If I make good with China, it's gonna make Russia soften their stance on us because they don't want a Chinese-American alliance. They don't want a powerful nation that close to their borders to have an alliance with their number one enemy. So it's again very good gameplay on Nixon part. Nixon is a amazing game player at times, especially when it comes to the foreign policy arena. So in 1971, he lifts the trade embargo with China that we had, and then the UN recognizes the communist China as the real rulers of China, and they expel the Taiwanese delegates out of the UN for the mainland Chinese delegates. Nixon shook Mao Zedong's hand on prime television, which was powerful for people to see. And so now that the trade is opened up with China, Soviet Union then softens its stance on America, fearing the alliance, and they enter a period of détente. That's what's called as de-escalating tensions, relaxation of strained relations, using verbal communication by talking pretty much. So the softening, this period of détente means more expanded trade with Soviet Russia, which helps both economies. They agree to nuclear parity. So at this point in the nuclear arms race, they want to have more than the other person, right? The U.S. wants to have more nuclear arms than Russia, and Russia wants to have more nuclear arms than America. So they have an agreement that says we'll have equal amount of arms. And then they do something called the Strategic Arms Limitation Agreement, called SALT, where they limited the amount of missiles and submarines that each of them can have. And it helped lower tensions. It was wildly unpopular with a lot of people in Congress because, the war hawks and the anti-communists. And it's interesting as someone who's so anti-communist to then really make an alliance with or open up trade with a big communist country and really soften tensions with another one. He's anti. So there is a practicality to Nixon. There's an anti-communist at home, but not pro-communist, but anti-communist in the streets. Anti-communist in the sheets, pro-communist in the streets. There is that sort of vibe to him where he's not impractical, where he won't to help America's economic standing, to help American defense standing, to make these sort of alliances and verbal agreements and treaties with these communist countries. Pro-communist in the streets, anti-communist in the sheets. That's how I describe Nixon. That made me happy. If you're even listening at this point, I like that. All right, so the 1972 elections were finally here. That's his re-election campaign. He's forced to face Ted. Originally, it's thought that he was going to face Ted Kennedy, but Ted Kennedy, of course, does Chappaquiddick. I might do a whole episode on Chappaquiddick later. There is something, if you look on my Instagram on my story highlights, I do a whole thing on Chappaquiddick, but I'll do one for the podcast as well, where Ted Kennedy basically kills a girl and gets away with it, obviously. But Nixon had to face the three Kennedy brothers. He had to face JFK, RFK, and Ted. Or he didn't have to face RFK and Ted, but they were in the cards for him. Nixon is, besides fate, Nixon is Kennedy's greatest enemy, I would say, Besides the weird final destination god that the Kennedys pissed off, I would say Nixon was probably their biggest rival. Politically, anyways. It goes final destination god 1, Nixon 2. So he loses Congress. So during Nixon's whole presidency, he never had control of Congress. Congress was both the House and the Senate were both Democratic at the time, and they overrode a lot of his vetoes. But at the same time, he still got a lot done, which still, like, as nasty as politics always is, there's still showing that there seemed to be at least some level of cooperation between the two sides, enough to, like, still get stuff done. In modern day politics, I mean, you saw it with Obama, you see it with Trump. It's just you'll see it with Trump this next term, but Trump is not supposed to get next term. We'll see if he goes down swinging on that. Still. But you saw it with Obama, where the Republicans wouldn't budge a single inch for anything Obama, and that didn't seem to be the case in the 1970s, late 1960s. I miss that level of American politics. 72, that's when Watergate happens. Basically, Nixon's team, he's not aware of what the team is doing, but he's aware of the team. Nixon's team bugs the Democratic National Convention offices, the Democrats' offices on the Watergate Hotel. They bug it. They go in. They break in and bug it. It goes fine. Then they need to repair the bugs, and that's when they get caught. And they get caught in a pretty stupid way. The regular Knights Guardsman notices, like, there's tape over the doors to keep them from locking, and he notices it happens twice. And it's like, look, obviously kudos to that guy for catching him, but hey, you are stealing information for a presidential campaign. You should not be thwarted by the night security guard. It's just one guy. The guy calls the cops once he notices that the tape is over the door. So basically, there's, when you tape a door shut so it can't lock, you tape over the lock area on the door jamb. He notices it, thinks someone was, not thinking, rips it off. They're retaped. That's when he calls the police, and they find the robbers. And it's pretty like hilarious. The guy who's supposed to be the watchman for the robbers is too busy watching TV to notice the police come. It's like that. It's tied to the people who are robbing the place are tied to Nixon's re-election fund, and Nixon doesn't know that they did it. He's not aware of that. But what gets Nixon is that he's involved in the cover-up, and that's what really gets Nixon it's found that during the investigation, Nixon has secret audio recordings. He secretly audio recorded everyone who came into the presidential office. Which, hey, Nixon, that's stupid, for sure. I know he was doing that to, like, hold blackmail over people, but for sure, don't do that. Don't incriminate yourself. You're clearly doing illegal things. Don't record yourself doing those illegal things. You would think that's, duh, but he does it. The special investigator. So there's a special investigator involved in investigating him. He fires that investigator. I think it's called Bloody Saturday. Oh no, the Saturday Night Massacre, where he asks the special investigator to get fired, and the attorney general, I believe, quits. The guy next to him quits, and then the third guy is the one who finally fires him. But at that point, there's so much going on. He hands over the tapes after he fires the investigator. The tape has 18 and a half minutes wiped out. And it just sort of becomes clear that Congress has lost faith in him. The Republicans are even like, oh, we got to vote this guy out. This cover up is too much. It's bad for us to be siding with him. And so his approval rating plummets. And so Nixon in 1974 decides to resign. I'm gonna see if I can find his speech on YouTube. I meant to look this up earlier, but then I got too busy watching Netflix. You know how it is when you have to do work, but you watch anime on Netflix instead. Let's see. Richard Nixon resignation speech. 19 minutes. Let's see if I can find it here. Let's see.
To do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. As long as there was such a base, I felt strongly that it was necessary to see the constitutional process through to its conclusion. That to do otherwise would be unfaithful to the spirit of that deliberately difficult process and a dangerously destabilizing precedent for the future. But with the disappearance of that base, I now believe that the constitutional purpose has been served.
So, I mean, I don't know if the first part might have been a little too soft for you to hear, but just the idea of, what is good for the country. Nixon, of course, wants to be president, wants to stay president, but for the purpose of the country, for the purpose of, what the Constitution says, it's important for me to step down here. And it's an interesting resignation. He never apologizes. It's a smart resignation. He never takes responsibility, but he says, in the interest of the country, I must step down. So it's still a very the spin is good. Even at the end, Nixon is a good game player. It's a 15-minute speech. It's fascinating. Towards the end, he flips away talking about things around the world, and he talks about foreign affairs and all that sort of stuff. It's a very fascinating speech. I would listen to it if you have the chance. Wikipedia has a good version of it. YouTube has a good version of it. But yeah, so he quits. That's the sort of end of his presidency right there. And yeah, I would go ahead and give Nixon a medium dick energy, average dick energy, ADE for Nixon. ADE for Nixon. It's fascinating. Just a fascinating, weird guy. Very powerful, very good politician, very good orator. I mean, I listened to the whole speech yesterday. Well, I think most of it, maybe not the whole speech. It was late at night. But you can tell how he would win a radio debate. I don't know where he ranks in terms of the president's rankings has him at in the 30s. So there's definitely worse presidents than him. He's clearly not the best president, but yeah, he's remembered mostly for Watergate. I mean, as he should maybe. But there were some positives to him that people don't know, and just interesting things about him that I didn't know till I just read his Wikipedia of all things, and that's not even doing a deep dive into who Nixon was and what his presidency was like. This is, like I said, all these are meant to just be cursory outside glances, than deep dives and real looks into what's going on. I may in the future, once I'm done with the presidential dick energy series, or once I'm done with the religious text series. There's so much I have to go through, so I can't start another series now. But would like to go through Watergate with a fine-tooth comb and see what actually happened there. Maybe I'll do a whole presidential scandals thing in the future one day, where we go through all of them, all of the major ones, because there's a lot of interesting ones. The Petticoat Affair, way back in the olden days, is a really good one. Watergate is a good one. President Clinton's fun blowjob time was a good one. So there might be something in the future, but yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This was a nice 40-minute episode, a nice long PDE episode. I give Nixon an ADE. I was excited to do this. He was obviously a lot more interesting than Ford. Ford was kind of a the guy who filled his place. We do Lyndon B. Johnson next. One of the more liberal presidents, I think, of all time. As far as an American liberal can go, at the very least. Yeah, so I think this is it for the Friday episode. You might get an episode Monday. It depends on when I'm able to film with my mom. If we film, we might be able to film Sunday. If we do film Sunday, I'll try to put it out Monday. If we film next Wednesday, it'll come out next Friday. And then we'll do we'll do Exodus either next Friday or the Friday after, depending on when the episode with my mom comes out. We'll start Exodus. All right, guys. This is been another episode of the Dangerous Brown podcast. Thank you guys for listening. The sleeper cell is small, but it is growing. Thank you. I love you guys so much. Donate to Wikipedia again if you have the spare money. It brings you these presidential dick energies, you know. And yeah, join me for tea time on TikTok at 4. I mean, I do it every day pretty much, at least until the stay-at-home order is lifted. At least until I move back to LA. Once I have regular work, I'll still do tea time, but it might not be every day at 4. But for the foreseeable future, tea time is happening every day at 4. So join me for that. It's a lot of fun. Thank you guys for joining Presidential Dick Energy, guys. I appreciate it. I will see you guys either Monday or Wednesday. Later.